6 millimeters, that's less than a quarter of an inch, thinner than a pencil, and it decided who would live and who would die that night in the North Sea. In 20 minutes, one of the largest steel structures in the world flipped upside down with 212 people on board, and the cause wasn't a storm, it was a single weld that nobody checked. This is the story of how one invisible detail killed 123 people and forced the entire planet to change the way it builds anything that floats on the ocean. March 27, 1980, the Ekofisk oil field in the Norwegian North Sea. The Alexander Kielland wasn't an ordinary drilling rig. It was operating as a flotel, a floating hotel housing the workers from the nearby Edda 27C production platform. That night, the weather was bad, winds gusting to 40 knots, waves up to 39 feet, about 12 meters, but this structure was built to handle that. It stood on 5 massive steel columns, each one connected to the rest of the platform by tubular bracing. It was considered nearly indestructible. 212 people were on board, most of them off-duty, resting, having dinner, playing cards. And that's exactly when, down below in the submerged structure, nobody could see, 6 millimeters of metal started to give way. To understand what happened, you need to look at one specific part, bracing D6, one of 6 tubular bracings holding column D to the rest of the structure. Welded onto that bracing was a small mount for a sonar device, used during drilling operations, and that weld was only 6 millimeters. That 6 millimeters weld already had a fatigue crack, and the crack had been there for years, dating back to when the platform was built at a shipyard in France in 1976. Metal fatigue works like this. Every wave that hit the platform flexed that steel just a little. Millions of times, wave after wave, 2 small cracks grew silently outward from the weld, along the circumference of the bracing, without any inspector ever noticing. The paint on top hid everything. By the time the crack had grown enough to critically weaken bracing D6, all it needed was one more push, and the North Sea that night had plenty of pushes to spare. 6:30 p.m., bracing D6 finally gives way, a crack that survivors described as sounding like an explosion, followed by a strong shudder through the whole structure. With that bracing gone, the load shifts onto the other 5 bracings, still holding column D, and they were never built to carry that weight alone. In rapid succession, the other 5 bracings failed one after another from overload. All of column D tore away from the platform. The Alexander Kielland heeled over by about 30 degrees, and for a moment it seemed to level out. The men inside were sliding through the corridors with no idea what was happening. The lights went out. But the leveling didn't last. With one column gone, the entire platform lost its balance. The pontoons and the deck began taking on water, and it turned completely upside down. The lifeboats didn't work the way they were supposed to. Some couldn't be launched at the angle the platform was tilted at. In about 20 minutes, the indestructible floating hotel was upside down in the North Sea. This is where the story stops being an accident and becomes a lesson that changed the whole world, because the investigation didn't find bad luck. It found a failure that could and should have been caught. The Norwegian Commission spent months examining the recovered wreckage, and the verdict was damning. It all started with that 6 millimeter weld on the sonar mount, a poorly executed weld that already had cracks before the platform ever went into service. But there's a deeper layer to this. Inspection methods at the time simply weren't capable of finding that kind of crack, hidden under paint, underwater. The entire industry was operating on trust in structures it couldn't actually see inside of. And the most unsettling part, the Alexander Kielland wasn't unique. Other platforms with the same design and the same weld points were floating out there with people on board in that exact same year, 1980. The Alexander Kielland disaster rewrote the rules of offshore engineering worldwide. Fatigue inspections became mandatory. The concept of fail-safe design was born, the idea that no single part should ever be able to bring down the entire structure. New crack detection technologies were developed. After the accident, requirements for lifeboat coverage and survival suits changed too. Today, regulations require 200% coverage in lifeboats and survival suits on offshore installations, a stark contrast to 1980 when only a few of the 212 people on board even had access to a survival suit. 123 people died because of a 6 millimeter weld that nobody checked properly, but the change their deaths forced has already saved countless lives since then.